Alright, hey guys, what's up? Welcome to T-Ski Tutorials, and this is FPS 1.25. So, in this episode, basically we're just going to be fixing a couple of glitches from our last episode, because our last episode was how to create a very simple culling mask, just so that your gun doesn't go through the walls. Now, we have a couple of glitches that we need to fix, and those are, first of all, if a gun is lying on the ground, it's still going to be on the gun layer, so you're going to be able to see that gun through walls, and that makes no sense. We only want the gun to not go through walls, or not look like it's going through walls when we're holding it. So we're going to turn it back to the default layer when it's just laying on the ground, and we're going to turn it onto the gun layer when we're holding it. The next glitch we need to fix is, let's say we have a sniper rifle or something like that zooms the camera in really far. Now, right now, the gun camera stays at the default, I think it's a viewing angle of 60 degrees. So, right now, if you zoom in and let's say you have a sniper rifle, you are going to zoom in on objects that are far away, but the gun is going to stay the exact same size, and it looks like the gun is shooting forward in space, and it looks really weird. So what we're going to do is just create a little bit of simple code just to make sure that the field of view, or the angle at which the camera zooms in and out, is going to match the main camera. So the gun camera and the main camera are going to have the same field of view. So let's open up the script and learn how to do that. Alright, let's actually get into the script that we're going to be using, and the first script that we're going to modify is the gun script. So, we're just adding one variable to the gun script, and this is a variable called gun model parts, and this is of type game object, and it is an array. So, if you notice, there is an opening and a closing square bracket right after game object. So, to declare an array is the exact same way to declare a regular variable. You just write var, whatever name you want to name the variable, colon, whatever type of variable you want it to be, and then you put an opening and a closing square bracket, and this means that now it's not just one variable, now it's a list of variables. So we can save multiple game objects, and in this case we're going to be remembering all the different parts of the gun. So in my game I have the gun made up of many different cubes, but in your game you might have imported a gun and actually have a gun model, and this might not all be one part. There might be multiple parts, like say the gun itself, the magazine, the hand holding the gun, or maybe you got a gun model that's made up of tons and tons of breakable parts. So we need to save all of those different parts, because each of those game objects need to be changed, or you need to change their layer so that, or we need to change the layers back and forth between default and the gun layer, so that the culling mask knows which guns to not draw through walls and which ones to leave on their own regular default. So now that we actually have the array declared in our gun script, inside of the inspector, this is going to be a little bit different from your normal variable. So we're not going to be able to drag, or we are going to be able to drag and drop a game object from our scene into this variable, but we need to do something first. So next to our variable, there's going to be a little drop down arrow. So if you click that, you're going to be able to input a number, and this number is going to be the number of variables on this array list. So, depending on how many parts of the gun we're going to have, we're going to change the number. So what we need to do is go inside of our gun object, and we need to look and we need to count the actual number of different parts that have a visible model on them. So, like let's say it's 6. We're going to set this number to 6, and then we're going to drag and drop each of these parts onto it so that we can remember all of the different parts that make up the gun. Alright, so first we're going to be putting some code inside of this if statement here, which is if being held. So if our gun is being held up and is ready to shoot, we're going to add this little bit of code inside of that if statement. And right here I have a comment just to represent all of the code that is already normally inside of that if statement. And I have written code for when the gun is active and ready to shoot. So this for loop we're just going to add inside of the if statement, and what this is going to do is it's going to go through that list of game objects that make up our gun, or the model of our gun, and it's going to turn the renderers on, or not the renderers on, it's going to change the layer to the gun layer for each of those gun objects. So a for loop is different from an if statement, whereas an if statement is just if this line is true, then execute this line of code. Whereas this time in a for loop, we're going to be going through the lines of code multiple times with a variable, and then we can change that variable every time we go through it. And basically, it's going to be repeating a repetitious task multiple times in a row. So in this case, we have for var model object of type game object. So right now we're just declaring a variable called model object, and it is of type game object. So this is going to be the variable that every time we go through this for loop, this variable is going to change, and it's going to go down, it's going to start with the first game object on the list of the parts that make up our gun, and then it's going to execute this line of code, and then it's going to move down to the next one on the list. So every time we go through this for loop, it's going to go one down on this list until it goes through the whole list. And so that it knows what list we're going to be using, we simply just write in gun model parts, because this is our array up here. So this is the list of all the different parts of our gun. So we're just going to have this swap itself, or it's going to change itself every time we go through the for loop, so that it goes through the entire list of gun model parts. So what we're going to be doing to each of these gun model parts, or each of these game objects that make up our gun model, is we're simply just going to write model object, which is going to be the game object that is the different parts in this list, and we're going to access the layer, so just dot layer equals 8. So by default, there's already going to be 8 layers inside of your project. No matter what project it is, you just create a new project and you're going to have 8 layers. Some of these layers are water, effects, and a couple other ones that I can't remember, but it doesn't really matter. These are the default layers. And 0, the first one on this list, is going to be the very default layer, and this is the one that's going to be treated completely normally by everything. So this is, or we're going to set it to 0 when we want the gun to be laying on the ground, and we don't want it to go through any walls or be visible through any walls. So what we're going to do is we're going to create our own custom layer called gun layer, and this is going to be the 9th layer on the list. Now it says 8 because the list starts at 0. It doesn't start at 1 like you normally think it would. It starts at 0, so when we write 8, really it's the 9th one on the list because you have to include 0. So when we write gun object dot layer equals 8, basically we're changing the game object's layer to the gun layer so that it can be seen through walls, so that when our gun goes through the wall, we can still see it and it looks normal. Now let's move on to the if statement, if being held is false. So if our gun is just lying on the ground and waiting for the player to pick it up, we want it to look like a normal game object. We don't want to be able to see it through walls because that looks really weird. We want, when we go around the corner, we want the gun to disappear behind the wall like any normal object would. So to do this, we're going to do almost the exact same thing as we did for if the gun is being held, or actually we're going to be doing the exact same thing. We're creating a for loop that's going to declare a variable model object in gun model parts. So it's just going to keep on swapping through and going down the list of parts of our gun that we want to turn invisible and visible on and off. And the only thing that we're going to change is that instead of setting the layer to 8, or the gun layer, we're going to set it to 0, or the default layer. So when it's on the default layer, we can't see it through a wall, and basically it's going to behave like any other game object in our game. Alright, so that is everything you need to know on how to make the gun while it's laying on the ground not be visible through walls, and when it's being held, actually be visible when it goes through walls. But there's one other thing we still need to change, and we need to create a new script, and we're going to call this gun camera script, and this one is actually going to be really simple. We only have one variable, and that is going to be camera object. So camera object is going to save the game object of the main camera that sees everything in the world, whereas the gun object only sees the gun, and then it layers these two on top of each other. So right now we have the mouse look script attached to the main camera, and this script is what's in charge of zooming in and out and moving around. So there's one thing that we actually need to change. Right now we have the gun camera set as a child to the main camera, and this is perfectly fine. This is going to make the gun camera move with the main camera perfectly fine, but the only thing we need to change is zooming in and out, because right now the gun isn't going to zoom in and out because we didn't change the field of view of the gun camera. So camera object, this is of type game object, and we're just in the inspector. Or actually, no, not even in the inspector. We're going to have this automatically happen inside of the awake function. So inside of the awake function, or when this game object is created, we're going to set camera object to game object.findWithTag main camera. So we want to make sure in our scene that the main camera is the only camera with the tag that says main camera. If we have more than one camera or more than one game object with the tag main camera, the script is going to screw up. So just make sure that the main camera is the only game object with the tag main camera. So this line of code is going to save the game object that is the main camera. Alright, now inside of function update, or what's going to happen every single frame, we're going to set camera.fieldOfView. Now remember, when we just write camera, it's going to access the camera that is attached to the game object that this script is attached to. And then we're going to access the variable field of view. So when this number is bigger, the camera is going to be more zoomed out and it's going to have a larger angle. When it's smaller, it's going to be more zoomed in and have a smaller angle. So we want this angle to completely match the angle that the main camera has, because we want the gun and the world around us to both zoom in and out accordingly. So we have camera.fieldOfView equals, and this is the field of view that is, this is the field of view of the gun camera, and we're going to have it equal camera object dot camera dot field of view, or it's going to access the field of view of the camera that is attached to the main camera. So basically, this line of code, basically every frame is just going to match the field of view of the gun camera and the main camera so that they both zoom in and out the same amount at the same time. Alright, now that is all the code that we need to actually fix the calling mask so that it doesn't give us any glitches. So let me cut the green screen and go into Unity and show you how to do that inside of Unity. Alright, here we are inside of Unity. Now let me first demonstrate the problems we were having and the problems that we will fix in this episode. So to make this easier, first of all, I'm going to delete this pistol by pressing Command backspace or Control backspace if you're on a PC. And I'm going to select this pistol, and you can see we already have it on the gun layer. And I'm going to change the zoom angle to 5. And then I'm going to drag and drop this pistol on top of the pistol prefab inside of our project window. Now we should be able to drag and drop a couple of pistols into our scene. Oops, not where I wanted to drop it. I want to drop it over there. Alright, good enough. Now let's take a look at our game. As you can see, the gun does not go through anything anymore because we have the calling mask set up. And I think I need to move these pistols up a little. It looks like they're intersecting into the ground. Let's try that one more time. Nope, they still didn't show up. I think it is because I have them set to being held. Okay, let's try that one more time. There we go. Alright, so all these pistols should be the same now, and they don't go through walls, but we have a problem. When they're sitting on the ground, we can still see them through the walls. And I don't know if you can see right in there, we can still see the guns. So let's fix that. So I'm going to select these guns again, and I'm just going to get those out of the way. And we're just going to be working on this pistol today. And first of all, let's modify the gun script. I should have opened up MonoDevelop before I started this video, so we're going to have to wait a second. Alright, so here's the gun script. Now let's create the variable that we need. And we have var gun model objects game object and opening and closing square brackets. So this is going to be the variable that we're going to save a list of game objects that make up our gun, and make sure you have the square brackets right there to make an array, which is a list. And as you can see, we have gun model objects with a little arrow next to it, and then when we click the arrow down, we see size, and right now size is set to 0. Now let's set that to the number of cubes that we have inside of our gun, and I have them labeled as gun parts, and you can see these are all the different cubes that make up the gun, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them. So let's go to the pistol and let's set size to 5, and now we have 5 blank spaces to drag and drop each of these. So let's go ahead and do that. This is a little tedious, especially if you have a lot of parts. Hopefully you only have 5 or less, or somewhere around there. Alright, so now we have the list of all of the game objects, or of these game objects right here, which make up our visible gun. So now let's go into mono-develop, and we have if being held, and let's create our first for loop, not for, and let's create a variable for this called model object, and I'm going to just go over and double check to make sure that's what I called it in here. Yep, model object. And that is of type game object in gun model objects. And now we're going to do model object dot layer equals 8. Alright, so now if the gun is being held, it's going to go through this list of game objects that we set in the inspector, and for each of the lists in here, it's going to temporarily save that into the variable called model object. And for every item or every game object in this list, it's going to go through this line of code, and it's going to set the layer for each of those to 8. And I'm going to double check, make sure I did that right. Yes, I did. Okay. Oops, and we can exit out of that. Alright. And now I'm just going to copy and paste this. And I'm going to go down to if being held equals false. And I'm going to paste it there. And I'm going to do the exact same thing for each of those game objects, except instead of setting the layer to 8, I'm going to set it to 0. So let's save that and go back to Unity, and let's give it a little test run. It looks like I have a compiler error. Model object. That means I got to change it down here too. Now let's go into Unity, now that I fixed my spelling errors, and now let's give it a try. Oh wait, you know what I need? Is another pistol to test this out on. So now that we have all of those settings set in our pistol, let's drag and drop the pistol from the hierarchy on top of the pistol in the project, or the prefab. So now when we select pistol, we can see all of the gun parts are listed accordingly. So now let's drag and drop. Actually, one thing I want to change in this prefab is by default I don't want it to be being held. So now when I go over here, this one I want to be being held, and this one is not being held. So one thing about prefabs is that it's probably hard to see on the screen right now, but this word right here is blue. That means that it's a prefab. And this variable right here is bold. So that means that this is set differently than its default according to the prefab. So just making sure that the guns that we are going to throw on the ground are not set to being held. And the one that I am holding is set to being held. So I should be able to switch with any of these. And they do not go through the wall. I can't see that gun through the wall. And let me walk up to the wall. My gun that I am holding right now doesn't go through the wall. It doesn't go through the ground. Shouldn't go through anything. Let me switch again. Just do some more testing. Yeah, I can't see any of those guns through the walls. So, first part of the tutorial complete. How to stop the guns from going through the wall. Alright, now next we need to create a new script, and I'm going to go over here, create JavaScript, and I'm going to call this gun camera script, and this script should be fairly simple. First I'm just going to create the only variable that we're going to be using, and I'm going to call it camera object. Oops, and we got to set that of type game object. And now let's do function awake. And the only thing we need to do is set camera object to be game object dot find with tag main camera, and I'm gonna go into Unity really quick just to, yep, there's no space in the word main camera. Perfect. So main camera semicolon. Alright, so now we have the game object saved. Now of course you could easily just drag and drop it in the inspector. I just chose to do it this way. You can choose whichever way works best for you. So now we simply are going to set camera, or the camera that is attached to the game object that this script is attached to, dot field of view equals camera object dot camera dot field of view. So we are setting the camera that is attached to this game object, and we're accessing field of view, and we are just going to have it copy the field of view that or the field of view variable on the camera that is attached to the main camera. So that is all that this script is going to be doing. So let's select this and let's drag and drop the gun camera script onto there, and that should work automatically, except unknown identifier camera object. Oh, why do I keep on missing C's? I just can't type today. Alright, now let's go back to Unity. Errors are all gone. And now camera object, we could, actually it doesn't matter whether or not we drag and drop that main camera onto there, because it's going to automatically set it to the main camera anyways. So let's save that, and let's take a look, and remember our pistol should zoom in, and it zooms in on the pistol and the world around us. So both cameras are zooming in at the same time. So let me just go back to MonoDevelop, and I'm going to comment out this line of code just to show you a quick comparison, to show you what it will look like if we didn't have this camera or this script working. So see, the gun itself is not zooming in, but the world is. So let's go back to MonoDevelop, uncomment out that line of code, and it should be working perfectly now. Great, it is. Awesome. So that is how to do it with the pistol. And of course we can do the exact same thing with the rifle. So in fact, why don't we go ahead and do that? So here's our rifle, and we have 4 parts attached to this particular rifle. So let's set the length to 4. Drag and drop each of the gun parts into this list. And that should be everything we need. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to create a prefab, and I'm going to call this rifle. And I'm going to drag and drop this rifle onto that prefab. So now we can create as many rifles as we want. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to test this, and I'm going to pick up one of these prefab rifles, and it's not going through the ground, and it looks like it's zooming in just fine. Awesome. And yeah, this has been ETSki Tutorials FPS 1.25. So until my next episode, I'll see you guys later. Keep making games.